About 2 days ago, OpenAI CEO Sam Altman made a fairly simple tweet announcing that you can now disable chat history and training in ChatGPT. I've read through this update and combed through OpenAI's different policies for API and non-API users, so in this video, I'll explain why this decision was just made and how it affects you and the future AI models. The tweet from Altman links to the New Ways to Manage Your Data in ChatGPT blog post by OpenAI, which starts off by saying, ChatGPT users can now turn off chat history, allowing you to choose which conversations can be used to train our models. For some background, up until 3 days ago, users of ChatGPT by default granted OpenAI access to their data, like prompts, feedbacks, etc., for the use of training OpenAI's LLMs with a fairly complicated opt-out option. This has not been the case for API users though, as their usage data was not used to train AI models by default unless the customers opt in. OpenAI's API customer policy clearly states, OpenAI will not use data submitted by customers via our API to train or improve our models unless you explicitly decide to share your data with us for this purpose, and that any data sent through the API will be retained for abuse and misuse monitoring purposes for a maximum of 30 days, after which it will be deleted unless otherwise required by law. With Altman's announcement, OpenAI policies for ChatGPT users is now similar to API users, allowing users to easily opt out of sharing their data with OpenAI for training its model, but with a caveat. That is, by turning off data sharing with OpenAI, you also deactivate the convenience of having your conversation history with ChatGPT saved, as usually seen in the ChatGPT sidebar. The article further says that even when disabled, just as is with their API user policy, OpenAI will retain new conversations for 30 days and review them only when needed to monitor for abuse before permanently deleting. It is important to note that whilst you can now deactivate data sharing and thereby losing your chat history, you can still download all chat data subsequent to the day you opted out of data sharing. The change in policy is a response to investigations by the EU and Canadian data protection authorities into OpenAI for the way it collects and uses personal data in ChatGPT, with Italy going as far as temporarily banning it. The EU has the world's strictest data privacy policies with its GDPR, and OpenAI has until the end of April to comply. Experts say this might prove impossible because of OpenAI's vague and extensive data collection methods. While Europe may be leading the data protection campaigns against big tech, the rest of the world and even the usually frugal United States White House is now making rules for AI accountability, and the FTC has even gone fast demanding that companies delete their algorithms and any data that they may have collected and used illegally. Wojciech Wiewiorowski, an European data protection supervisor, in an interview with MIT Tech Review's Melissa Hekila, said the definition of hell for big tech is European legislation with American enforcement. This is largely because the EU data protection approach is connected with the purpose for which the data is used. So, when you change the purpose for which the data is used, and especially if you do it against the information that you provided people with, you are breaking the law, which is considered the reason for the temporary ChatGPT ban in Italy on claims that OpenAI's reported use purpose of the data was found to be incoherent with the actual use. Alexis Lothier, an AI expert at the French data protection agency CNIL, says if OpenAI cannot convince the authorities its data use practices are legal, it could be banned in specific countries or even the entire European Union. It could also face hefty fines and might even be forced to delete models and the data used to train them. For a company like OpenAI that relies heavily on data to train its LLMs, the stakes could not be higher. Although OpenAI is responding to the growing demand for data privacy and protection, it will need to be more transparent about its data practices, and we have to show it is using one of two possible legal ways to collect training data for its algorithm, through consent or legitimate interest to the EU and regulators worldwide. And this Altman statement is the first step of good faith to help OpenAI maintain its current standing as the most widely used AI model. OpenAI, Stability AI, Bard, and others have been known to use unconventional sources to gather data to train their AI models. Google was recently accused of training Bard with ChatGPT data, and GPT-3 was largely trained with datasets from Common Crawl or the C4 database, which contains contents from pirated ebook sites like Boost. Stability AI's new stable LLM was also trained using a larger version of Pile, an 850GB dataset which includes content from the C4 database, Parisi book site, bibliothèque, 100GB of GitHub code, and entire EU Parliament proceedings. In summary, OpenAI's new ChatGPT history setting is merely a mitigation of the consequences of a near repeat of the same carelessness that led to the infamous Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal. OpenAI has responded to the growing demand for data privacy and protection, but it will need to do more to comply with EU regulation. Whilst on the surface, it seems to be a net positive for users who don't want all their ChatGPT prompts being reviewed for training AI models, it is a negative that with the upcoming launch of ChatGPT Business, accessing your chat history becomes hidden behind a paywall if you want to protect your privacy. A sacrifice not many are willing to make. Check out this video on what you can actually do with an autonomous GPT-4. Thanks for watching.